go ahead.
Alrighty. I actually was able to get my other monitor working, so now I got it as well. So
Great.
the MCDD board will now enter executive session pursuant to RS 40.255, RS 192.35598, and 192.6602F for the purposes of discussing confidential legal advice and attorney-client communication not related to litigation.
All right.
Start the recording. All right, we just came out of executive session to discuss a consent order with Department of State Lands. And could I get somebody to read off what we need to approve?
And Hong, do you have, I don't know, can you put some language in the chat maybe for that? I don't see it in our materials
Sure.
as far as like a very obvious motion.
Okay, I will move to approve that the executive director sign the consent order as attached to the July 21st, 2021 letter from Department of State Lands.
And I'll second.
All right, let's do a roll call vote. Corky,
Aye.
Nancy,
Aye.
and Ken Anderton votes aye. Motion carries.
Great. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and let everybody else in for now, and then I believe Tom will be sort of presiding over the bigger group. So give everyone a minute to come in, and then I'm sure we can call the boards to order and get rolling.
To the MCDD board, thank you for your understanding and support for moving forward with us. Appreciate it.
Good morning, all.
Morning.
James, Val, and I don't see Ken. Is Ken present?
Yes.
I'm
Just
here.
wanna- If we can just confirmation when you have a quorum. I think we might be there.
MCDD has a
Ken too has
quorum.
quorum. SDIC has quorum.
Yes.
Ken 1.
Yes.
Okay. So I'd like to welcome everybody to the July 15th, 2021 format meeting. I'd like to ask the boards to call to order. MCD, I assume you have already called to order, correct?
We have.
Yep, thought so. James, can you call Pen 1 to order, please? Let's see.
Can I do it for James?
Yes, please.
What do I do? Just make sure everybody's here and say order?
You're gonna just call Pen 1 to order and do a roll call. Roll call, who's present?
Pen 1 to order, PJ Christopher present.
And then Annalisa Kohler
Annalisa Curler present.
and Jeff Noodleman.
Present.
And I see James is here present and muted. So, and I don't expect, I'm not sure, I don't expect Claudio, I got it out of office from him that I believe he's on vacation this week.
PJ, thank you. Val,
This is Val Humble calling Pen 2 to order, and I am indeed here. Karen,
Karen Myers is here.
Mary Helen,
Mary Helen Kincaid is here.
Leslie,
Leslie Sawyer's here.
and Kathy.
Kathy Kellen is here.
All members are present.
Welcome, Pen 2. SDIC, I'd like to call us to order. Tom Hansel, present. Danny Stephenson.
Present.
Ken Anderton.
Present.
Format is in order. A reminder, this meeting is being recorded. And I think we are at public testimony at this time. Emily, any public testimony to be heard?
There is none that I'm aware of.
Excellent, thank you. Moving on, I have Nick, any contract approvals that you'd like to bring up at this time?
We have none for today, sir.
Excellent. Boy, this meeting's just moving right along. I'm down with natural hazard mitigation plan and update, delegation of authority for steering committee. Brian, are you with us this morning? Brian, I show your speakers off.
Hi there, guys. Just getting my screen set up here. Appreciate it. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, perfect. Sounds good. If I can, I'm going to share my screen here. Just let me shift into presentation mode. And cool. Sorry, it's going through all the different slide things on my end. Second, one more here. Okay. Sorry about this. I don't use Zoom every day, so it's always a little bit funny to switch between Teams and Zoom. So working on the share screen here. Like my PowerPoint disappeared. Sorry, everyone. Share screen, present.
I think this is sort of a universal human condition, Brian.
Thank you for your kindness. Okay, so I'm getting closer. Oh, fun. It's funny, whenever all the settings on my end up with me not being able to see any of you, which is not my ideal. Let me try one more time here. Okay, I got screen 1 and screen 2. Let's share that first. Okay, you're starting to see something, I think. Very good. We're making progress. I appreciate your patience with me. Now Zoom, share screen. Okay. It's funny. Every time I do something, my screen changes and I'm trying to figure out how to get the basic settings like share screen back. It just disappeared.
Yeah,
all right.
Brian, they changed teams around, and it depends on whether you have a split screen or not, so it can be confusing. So
Okay.
no worries, you're good. We can see it.
All right, let's get started. It can only go up from here. My name is Brian Eberhardt. I'm a project manager at MCDD. I know some of you, others of you I haven't seen in a while. I've been mostly doing projects in MCDD, but if you don't know this about me, I am our emergency program manager. And so we are working on a natural hazard mitigation plan and having our districts join our partners at the Multnomah County and some of the eastern cities as well. So I'm going to talk to you today about a project that is underway right now. I do have an ask that's coming your way. And this is something I'm going to let you know ahead of time what I'm going to ask so that as I talk through the presentation, you can kind of be thinking about any questions you might have for this. So this is towards Pen 1, Pen 2, and SDIC specifically, but this is also an informative briefing for MCDD. Basically, what I'm looking for today is to get your formal authorization to have MCDD represent you on this plan. This is something that FEMA has requested that I do because we don't have a staff for each of the other districts, which is a little unusual for these planning efforts. They asked that I get a designation and motion vote from each board. So that's what I'm aiming for today. But before I ask you to do that, let me share about what I'm talking about here. Okay. So briefly, what is a natural hazard mitigation plan? It's a FEMA process. It's a public participation process that looks at our natural hazards and risks to understand things like how would wildfires impact our operations? What about flooding, earthquakes, etc.? Identify our high risk hazards, and then look at what can we do about it, or maybe what we already are doing about it. Examples might be on the big end, the setback levy in Pen 1 would definitely qualify as a flood hazard mitigation project. Things like community engagement or flood awareness is also on on the smaller scale, things that can be done to help reduce hazards. So this is a process that has a range of options from capital to communications to revenue structures. And it's pretty common across the whole country. And it's our neighbors here in the county, or our co-jurisdictions. Multnomah County has a plan with Fairview and Wood Village, the city of Troutdale and Gresham. The city of Portland also has their own plan. We're trying to join on with the county plan because our districts don't fit really into one city specifically. And the city of Portland is has their own plan that they haven't invited others to join. So we're joining on the county's plan. They're in the renewal process right now. Their current plan was authorized in 2017 and lasts until 2022. So we are in the process of renewing that plan and trying to annex onto it for the districts. The city of Portland's plan is actively being updated by PMM, or the Bureau of Emergency Management. And we are helping them with their flood sections and also in coordination on mitigation actions where we have overlap. So just wanted to give you some of that regional context. Briefly, what is mitigation? Some of you from the environmental realm might think of things like more environmental or regulatory mitigation. This is about mitigation for hazards. So from the county, it says mitigation is the effort we take to reduce loss of life and property by lessening the impact of disasters, taking action now before the next disaster to reduce the human and financial consequences later. Mitigation planning creates safer communities, saves money, and enables individuals to recover more rapidly from disasters. In short, we try to reduce the hazard before it happens so that we have less expenses, we're down less, and people are safer, our equipment, it functions better. So that's what we're trying to do with the plan. The benefits of joining into the plan are to better understand our natural hazard risks, build public awareness about risks. One of the requirements of the plan is to be public. And so things like presenting at this, or maybe having this recording available with the plan, is something that could be available to the public to view, at least the opportunity to do so. Be proactive in mitigating our high hazard risks ahead of time. Gain public input along the way about ideas or strategies or concerns people have. And probably the biggest thing is this carrot at the end of the plan is, by doing this, we have easier access to federal funding for local mitigation actions. So right now, if we want to pursue a grant through FEMA, for the most part, we have to work through our partners that already have the plan. So like Multnomah County can be our sub-applicant, or the city of Portland has also talked with us about being a sub-applicant. But when we send our things to those jurisdictions, we have competing priorities. So if they have a priority that's higher than this, then we miss out. So this allows us to be able to directly apply for things, and also gives us a lot more options along the way. If we do have these plans approved by FEMA, then there's a couple of things that we're obligated to do. First one is that have an annual maintenance of the plan, where the steering committee looks at what's happened over the last year, what priorities have shifted, what new hazards may have come along. We have to share back with the public the things that we've accomplished during that time. If there are any significant changes that happen along the way during the planning cycle, which is a 5-year window, then we can make amendments to the plan. We have some in our governance coming up pretty soon, as you all know. And also, if we have any mitigation actions that we put in there that aren't already in our budgets, it does obligate us to some extent to acknowledge those things in our budgets or our CIPs or other planning documents. I'm going to take the tact of more embedding into this plan what we're already doing, and then allow us to be able to access funding to do it. During the plan renewal process, We are obligated to kind of report on what we've accomplished during the 5 years of the plan, highlight changes in our priorities that have happened, and acknowledge any changes in development. So kind of wanted people to know about, what does the plan require of us? What comes along with those strings and those financial options. The timeline for kind of public involvement is starting with this meeting going forward. We will be asking for public input on mitigation strategies. Our website project page is live. If you go to this link, which I can send out afterwards, or if you go to the kind of the projects pages within MCDD's website, this is now active and there's a survey there. It closes on October 31st. And then I'll be sharing a draft of the mitigation strategies that were identified within each district in the fall. And then working with the county, we'll put out a draft plan available for public input in January as the plan. And then I'll plan on coming back to the board with what we heard about public comments, any updates that we made or adjustments based on those public comments, and then kind of the next steps on what happens next. So the last thing that would happen before the plan is officially approved related to us is it goes to the state, then up to FEMA, and along the way we have to adopt the plan officially. So those are the kind of the sequence of public involvement and the board's involvement in it. And I wanted you to be aware of that timeline and also see if there was any feedback on maybe or any adjustments you'd like me to make. So I'm going to leave a little bit of room. I know I've been talking for 5 to 7 minutes here. So any questions or feedback on this approach or the plan in general?
I invite board members to ask any questions to Brian.
I have one.
Okay, Mary Helen.
It's sort of an entailed one, but and it's one I ask all the time. Is there going to be any way for people to provide input other than online? Any community groups, meetings with neighborhoods, associations? I'm just looking at the equity issue. If you don't have access to the internet or a device that can access this information, you're left out. So will there be mailings to members? Or to landowners or addresses really, because of renters are in the landowners' houses who sometimes live in Phoenix. And so
it's a very fair point, Mary Helen. I'll give you an answer and also say that I'll think more about this. One of our current challenges was with the COVID kind of restrictions. We have not been doing a lot of public events, as you're aware, and kind of meeting people directly. It doesn't mean that there aren't other ways to do it. And so I think one idea might be to have, if someone were to want to submit something, that they could come potentially or submit something directly to our office and then mail. So I'll have to think about that. Let me work with Evan and Jasmine kind of on our communication side to think about other ways beyond maybe social media or website to do that. So I appreciate the encouragement.
okay.
Nancy, your hand up.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I'll ask and then I'll figure out how to put it down. But so I'll echo that, Mary Helen. I really think, since we have equity policies in place and we're trying to be more equitable across the board, I think we should definitely not just rely on computer access, even to find it, much less, comment on it. So anywho, so thanks for Mary Helen for bringing that up. And Brian, I just want to underscore something that I think I understand about this plan, which is if we have activities in the plan and we have several large capital projects coming up, but if we put them in the plan, that makes us eligible for FEMA funding for grants or loans, correct? Correct.
Yeah, that is for me, one of my primary drivers for it is to be able to access other funding options. If it's something that's being funded by the Corps, we can't double dip for a federal project, but if it couldn't be qualified underneath the PMLS study, then this is a great alternative, especially for larger projects.
Great, thank you.
Thank you for underscoring that.
James, you have your hand up.
I think I have Kathy or James.
Great. Can everyone hear me?
Yes,
you're coming
Great.
through.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Brian. Great presentation. Just a quick question, I think. Since this participating in this planning effort goes beyond flood prevention and flood fighting into natural hazards writ large, any anticipation on what the costs will be to the individual districts? To obviously we'll have to fund that effort, and when those costs might, when we might start incurring those costs?
That is a great question. So this is being done all by staff versus being contracted out. So your costs are lower because of that. So right now it's primarily my time, and I split it the same way that I do for other emergency planning, which is primarily based on population. So it's 40% in MCDD and Penn 2, 10% each in Penn 1 and SDIC. That's what we've been doing for both communications and for emergency management for the last several years. So the costs are within the emergency program or emergency operations plan line item. This is one of the portfolio projects.
Great, thank you. That's helpful. And then again, am I correct to assume that this plan will address wildfire, which you mentioned, earthquake, and all types of foreseeable natural hazards?
Yeah. So the county, every renewal, so they were talking about how they might change it. In the past, it was 6 categories. Hopefully I'll remember them off the top of my head. So we have landslides, volcanoes, earthquakes, flooding, severe weather, and wildfires. And so in severe weather was kind of drought, and a lot of things are embedded in there. So they might be parsing those out a little bit differently this go around, from what I understand. But that's how they broke it out last time. So those are the ones we're evaluating. We might be making some subtle adjustments though.
Thanks again.
No problem. Thanks for the questions and for asking. I have Kathy as well.
Thanks, Brian. You started touching on my question, which is whether severe heat would be identified separately. Sounds like there is discussion about disaggregating severe weather into more particular instances, and I think that would be incredibly important. The percentage of people who work in the industrial corridor in the floodplain who work outside is pretty high. And so they're going to be the most vulnerable to severe heat. So it'd be great to see that identified sooner than later in any of the public surveys. That's great. No, thanks for bringing that up. I think one of the maybe strange things is that the thing you just brought up, it will be the responsibility primarily of the city or the county, that of the people that they're working in. You know, our scope is, as you know, is pretty narrow. So it's going to be like, what are our assets? What are our staff doing? You know, and what can we control? But that will be considered, I believe, by our partners especially. So yeah, but thank you for bringing it up. It's something that, you know, I started working on this a few years ago. I kind of stopped due to capacity. And bringing it back up, and just even looking back at the last couple of years, there's a lot of new material and things to be worried about. So I think it's very timely, and I appreciate that concern. Yeah, I'll just add that I do see there being a strong nexus with the district, in as much as the amount of tree canopy, cover, shade, things that you also associate with water quality benefits, stormwater runoff, localized flooding. Those are really natural remedies for addressing urban heat islands as well. So I think there's going to be a lot of convergence around these issues in the future. I agree. And I think that from what I'm hearing from the federal folks is that the new grants really do want that kind of multi-jurisdictional, multi-benefit, trying to look for how do we, like, if you want to be competitive in a grant right now, you kind of have to be looking across jurisdictions and across borders and across maybe natural, how you might think about yourself, right? So yeah, very, very valid. Yeah, thank you. I think that's part of the benefit of joining a multi-jurisdictional plan versus having our own plan, is we get to kind of say, oh yeah, we all agree on this. You know, this is a priority for our region. So thank you for bringing that up.
Thanks, Brian. I see in your staff report, you indicate we need to officially designate MCDD. What is the protocol for that official designation?
Sounds good. Sorry, I have 2 more slides, and I'm going to talk briefly about the steering committee, if that's all right, and then I will share that that ask again. So
Yeah, I just want to be mindful of time as well. This is
I appreciate that. Sounds good. I appreciate the questions, and if there are others, I'm available afterwards. Briefly, the steering committee is required by everyone has to have a member in the steering committee. You know, because there aren't staff of the other districts, I'm recommending that you designate, you know, me and the staff of MCDD to represent you, just like we do on every other project. And these are some of the representative responsibilities, which are meetings, looking at the scores and hazards, prioritizing mitigation actions, reviewing plans. So, so that is my recommendation, and I do bring this back up to Pen 1, Pen 2, and SDIC to request that designation. Or if you have any questions about alternatives, I'm open to discussing that too.
So I'll turn it to James. Do you, Pen want to make a motion?
Anyone from the Pen 1 board want to make a motion?
Sure, Mr. Jeff. I'll move to designate MCDD staff to represent Pen 1 on the Multnomah County multi-jurisdictional natural hazard mitigation plan steering committee in 2021 and 2022.
Great. Second. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Annalisa. Okay, let's go ahead and if any need for discussion from the Pen 1 board. Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and do a roll call vote. PJ Christopher.
Aye.
Annalisa Kohler.
Aye.
Jeff Noodleman.
Aye.
And James Allison votes aye, 4-1. Thank you. Or 4-0, sorry.
Thanks, James. Val, Pen 2.
Yes, this is Val Humble for Pen 2. Do I have a motion from a member of the board of Pen 2 concerning agreeing to formally designate MCCDD staff to represent us on the Multnomah County multi-jurisdictional natural hazard mitigation plan steering committee?
I'll move to designate MCDD staff to represent us on the Multnomah County multi-jurisdictional natural hazard mitigation planning steering committee in 2021 and 2022. That's worse than urban flood safety water quality.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Thank you, Mary Helen. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
It sounds like we have a Karen seconding louder than, yeah, okay. Is there any discussion? Let's take a roll call vote. Karen?
I vote aye.
Mary Helen?
Aye.
Leslie?
Aye.
Kathy?
Aye.
Val Humble votes aye. It's unanimous. Pen 2 adopts the agreement to be represented by MCDD staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Pen 2.
Thanks, Val. SDIC, do I have a motion?
I can make a motion that SDIC agrees to formally designate MCDD staff to represent them on the Multnomah County multi-jurisdictional natural hazard mitigation plan steering committee in 2021 and 2022.
I'll second that.
And boy, is
So I
that a
have
mouthful.
A motion by Ken, second by Tanny. Any discussion? Hearing none, roll call vote. Tom Hansel votes aye. Tanny?
Aye.
Ken?
Aye.
A motion passes. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you all for your time. Appreciate it.
So moving through our agenda, at item G, signing authority. Kelly, I think you're gonna get us going on this.
Hello. We brought you the signing authorities resolution at the last format meeting. In response to some of the feedback that we got, we made some changes. So each of the boards should have one resolution showing the track changes in the exhibit and one resolution that's clean that shows everything as accepted. And so you'll see in section 4 is where we made a majority of the changes. We just kind of made the language a little friendlier for staff to make sure that they're not required to take on responsibility for every possible known and unknown thing. So we kind of limited it to what's readily available in terms of information, so that as they are reviewing a contract and making sure that they've met all this due diligence, that it's not an impossible standard to meet. Next, we changed some of the language just to be more clear that it's not required that somebody make sure the district can meet every single obligation, but the material obligations under a contract, which are the important things that could become litigated on. We did kind of the same change for the contracting party that we're signing the contract with, to make sure that they can meet their material obligations under a contract. And then under section 4E, we changed the language from saying that the district contract complies with applicable laws, or in all applicable laws, to saying that the district contract has received legal review for compliance. And that may look like a template that legal has reviewed previously, or a template that's had changes made to it that have been approved by legal, or just any sort of different contract that we've not looked at before has gone through our department to make sure that it complies. And then the second change that we made in the other district contracts that are not MCDD have to do with discussing the intergovernmental agreements. And so when I was going through that, I just realized that not all of the districts have agreements with all the other districts, and that's mostly MCDD. So I just changed it to so that each district had the service agreements that apply to them in their signing authorities. And then I think at the very end, in section 8, because we didn't really have consensus on how often we should be bringing the reports to the board, we changed it to say that the executive director will provide at least an annual report to the board on the contracts that have been signed under this authority. And that way we can maybe start out with a quarterly report. And if that feels like it's too often or not often enough, we can change that without having to change this language. And so we can just receive direction from the boards about how, frequently they want to be receiving these reports. Are there questions about the changes or about the signing authority policy?
Questions for Kelly?
Tanny, you have a?
Yeah, I guess
like you unmuted?
the first one I would have would be, we're increasing a number of the amounts. The purpose behind that is what?
The purpose behind that was mostly efficiency. It's $100,000 is in line with a lot of our public partners, and I think you'll remember at the last meeting, I put a chart up in the PowerPoint that kind of showed each district's number of contracts that are under or over 100,000, and so how many approvals that would be. And so that was kind of one of the questions that I raised at the last meeting was if we're comfortable with that number. And I don't think we made significant changes to the amendment section. I think we actually made that a little bit more restrictive in that amendments that go over a certain amount would come back to the board that we didn't have before. So.
Okay. Yeah, I guess, yeah, I'd like to, I don't know if possible, I'd like to discuss this maybe at our board meeting.
The $100,000 number?
No, just a couple of things on here I'd like to have a little more clarity on.
Okay.
What exactly are the reports going to be? When are they going to be received? Some of those things. And so I'd just like to maybe do that individually.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm just speaking for SDIC.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think the idea behind this policy was to kind of give a broader direction. And then in terms of, kind of what the details of a report would be and things like that, that we would work that out and receive feedback from the board rather than trying to hash that out in this particular policy. And especially because that's something that could change over time, as you know, because this is a new thing that we haven't done before, and you may want it to look different in a year from now.
Yeah, and I just want to make sure that I'm meeting my commitment to the landowners.
Sure.
Okay, thanks.
I did check in with Nick about the workload required to prepare reports, and it sounds like it will be relatively easy for us to prepare those for board members who desire them. So I just want to share that there's a ongoing commitment from your staff to provide information to you all as requested.
So Kelly, Tanny's request is that I guess SDIC will pull this from today's agenda and place it on an SDIC board meeting agenda. Is that?
I will leave that in the capable hands of Emily to coordinate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So with the MCDD resolution today, will that need to be modified at all to exclude SDIC at this time, or will that just be in anticipation of an eventual? Because I don't know.
So they're not connected in that way. So MCDD would still, theirs would still look the same, even if you guys aren't passing yours today.
Yeah, each resolution of each district is different. So to the extent the other three districts are prepared to vote and approve, we can do that today.
Thank you, Hong. Thank you, Kelly. Any other questions or discussion from the boards? Seeing none, I'm going to go in the order of the packet. So I have Ken, you have the first resolution.
Alrighty. Any other questions for MCDD board before we vote? All right, I put the resolution in the chat. If I could get somebody to read that off.
Okay. I move to approve resolution R 2021-06-05, adopting a policy on district contract signing authority delegation for the district.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, do a roll call vote. Corky?
Aye.
Nancy?
Aye.
Ken Anderton votes aye. The resolution carries unanimously.
Thanks, Ken. James, Pen 1.
Thank you. Do I have a motion from the board followed by any discussion or questions?
I can make the motion. I move to approve resolution R 2021-06-06, adopting a policy on a district contract signing authority delegation for the district.
Thank you, Annalisa. Thanks, Annalisa. Thanks, Jeff. Okay, any discussion or questions before we have a roll call vote? Okay. PJ Christopher?
Aye.
Annalisa Kohler?
Aye.
Jeff Noodleman?
Aye.
And James Allison votes aye. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you.
Thanks, James. Val, Pen 2.
Yes. Do I have a motion from a Pen 2 board member concerning this resolution?
I can do it. And hopefully I got the language right. I move to approve resolution number R2021-06-06, adopting a policy on district contract signing authority delegation for the district.
Thank you, Kathy. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Karen. A roll call, or is there any discussion? Roll call vote, Karen?
I vote aye.
Mary Helen?
I vote yes.
Leslie?
I vote aye.
Kathy?
Aye.
And Val Humble votes aye. It's unanimous. Pen 2 passes the resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Val. Thank you, Kelly. Thanks, Hong.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is Jeff. I'd like to say Hong did a great job. I had a couple of questions and she did a fantastic job walking me through them, and we just had just an incredibly positive dialogue and understanding the importance of this for the staff and for the furtherance of the agency. And I really want to applaud her for all her efforts on it.
Yeah, you counselors work together. We realize that.
Thank you, Jeff.
So moving on to the PMLS, we have a presentation by Mark. Two objectives from this presentation is to review the timeline and decision points associated with the work outlined, and then review the potential methods to allocate costs associated with the PED between the 4 districts. Welcome, Mark and Jamie, excuse me, yes.
Hey, thank you. I'm going to let Jamie kick it off. And can everyone see the screen first? I will be the one manipulating the slides here.
Great. Thanks, Mark. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for giving us some time today. Just want to do a quick time check. I understand we have a time certain stop at 12:30 for the beginning of the auditor's report. Is that right?
Yes, please.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I've been working with Colin and Evan and Mark. We've been working together to identify the presentation topics and decision points related to the PMLS project moving forward. And we have a 18-month time schedule that we want to share with you and just walk through with you a little bit to familiarize yourself with what's coming up. And then we're going to take a little bit of a deep dive into the allocation conversation that we began back in January and February. So we want to refamiliarize yourself with the information we presented to you and where we are with that discussion. And Mark will be taking that part of the presentation. But just introducing this 18-month timeline and the presentation topics and decisions, this colorful chart is going to be something you're going to be seeing on a regular basis. And what we have tried to do is lay out the presentation topics over the course of the next 18 months. And we're presenting them in a, I guess the best way to say it is a bit of a formulaic approach, in that we recognize that we need to bring information to you. You need to be able to consider that and have conversation about it. And then we need to bring back information in order to have decision or direction. So it's like a 3-step approach for every one of these topics. And so that's why you'll see, like for the topic we have today, allocation 3, this is the 3rd presentation around the allocation methods. And then you'll see in the fall, we'll have the funding options 1. That'll be the 1st presentation about the funding options. And then we'll have a 2nd presentation around outcomes and research. And then a 3rd presentation where we'll be asking for direction. And so that's the approach that we're taking around each one of these topics, so that we can make sure that you have enough time within the meetings and between the meetings to understand and digest the information when we're asking for decision points. And so I'm not going to go through all the topics along the top, because we will be, this is in your packet, and we will be going through these in subsequent meetings. I do want to highlight that there is this dashed line, and there are some items below the dashed line. And the reason why those are there is because we haven't exactly figured out what the board's role is in relation to these items. We know that, like, for example, the IGA's issues conversation is something that we're still working on in terms of how to form that and bring that forward to all of you, as well as the HTRW and the real estate. Those conversations are somewhat dependent on contractor involvement. And so that's why those fall below the dash lines. So we'll be bringing those up at some point, but we're not quite ready to do that yet. So I want to pause there just for a moment. And again, this is just an introduction. You'll be seeing this pretty much at every meeting as we update you about where we are in these conversations. I just want to pause and see if folks have any questions on this schedule and approach at this high level.
I'm just going to say that I appreciate you approaching this as like an 18-month through line. So we'll be able to follow it along every month or so that we meet. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Nancy. And so not seeing other questions, so I'm going to direct your attention to this first bar, which is the allocation number 3. And as I said, this is the third presentation that we've had around the allocation methodologies and conversation. And so I'm going to hand it over to Mark, and he's going to remind you of the information we shared back in January and February, the subsequent conversations that have occurred, and where we are today. So Mark.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jamie. This slide should look pretty familiar to you. I think there's one item that the PED costs might not have been on there, but these are the cost allocation methodologies that we introduced previously. Most of them make sense, and my goal today is to kind of talk about which ones we've sort of narrowed down as perhaps being good reference metrics, but maybe not being ones that staff will ultimately recommend to the boards. And as Jamie indicated, our goal is to start to narrow this. We're not pressed to narrow this down unless there's some landmark consensus on one of these to go, one of our methods to go with. But I'm going to explain to you why some of these are better suited as reference methods, and which ones are sort of our leading methods, and some of the new ones that we've arrived at. So I think these all should look familiar, just in case you need a refresher on the very last one. The composite number 1 is obviously, in some ways we look for better metrics than just certain ones at face value. They don't kind of represent all interests. And so we came up with the 50-50 project cost and economic benefits composite, and that just weights both numbers equally. And for each district, we took the costs in that district from the PMLS estimates, and we weighted them equally and arrived at something that sort of shared costs incurred and benefits received, and with the most sort of up-to-date metrics and overall metrics. These are, again, those methodologies. And so I'm just setting this up. You'll see another list here shortly where you see which ones we sort of put less emphasis on.
And just one quick clarification, the numbers here do not convey any priority order. It's more just so we can track them.
Yeah, absolutely. So some of these we consider reference methods are listed here, and by calling them reference methods doesn't mean that they can't or won't be used, but they aren't, perhaps we don't consider them ideal for consideration in and of themselves without any other sort of compositing. So project cost, PED cost by district, and we laid this out in the board memorandum. So that kind of goes into a lot of detail. This is sort of simplified version. So we obviously, some of these metrics show where the costs are incurred, but they don't necessarily show where the benefits are received. And then that leads to some pretty uneven costs. And I think most of you saw that previously. Levy mile is a great metric. It's a great allocation method that we've used in the past. It's very traditional. It's very familiar to everyone, but it doesn't really take into account where these project costs are going to incur, because they're not evenly distributed across all districts and across all levy mile, nor does it really recognize the interaction of the modeled floods scenarios and failure scenarios, and how damages are incurred by that flooding. Acreage has always been a great surrogate for sort of implying where damages are incurred, but obviously it is the least sophisticated. It doesn't take into account the actual property value, contents of buildings, or anything like that. And so it's kind of, it's not really representative. When you look at something, let's just, for example, an airport facility, which doesn't maybe have that many buildings, but it has some buildings with very high value assets. And then of course, residential buildings are much denser but lower value than commercial buildings, for instance, but also receive a proportionally higher damage during a flood than more robust buildings. So that is a metric that we moved on with and came up with a more sophisticated method, replacement value, along the way using some existing models. And then once we got into the PMLS, we received even more sophisticated numbers to substitute for sort of benefits received or damages avoided, if you will. So this one is also actually just a reference method, but it's been superseded by the economic benefits data that we received from the core feasibility study, which took into account more sophisticated modeling and flood depths, failure scenarios, and stuff that's most relevant. And then we also actually updated it with a lot of other data that wasn't economic impact data that wasn't factored into just pure building replacement value. And then finally, there's the equal distribution method, which I think, obviously a lot of folks would be concerned if everything was across the board, because the districts are of different size and have different values, and there's different factors there. So, yeah, on its own, that may not be a great metric. Okay. So if we sort of strike those out, some of those out, as you're saying, they have been superseded by better values or better metrics. And then the ones in gray, we recognize those could be integrated into other composites. So there is a place for those. So PED costs, I don't know, that one animated itself. Overall project costs, PED costs, economic benefits. These are all things that can be moved into other composites. So we also look at some different composites to try to give folks some options. And we're certainly, we have our ears open as we move forward to try to come up with any new composites that you think where we've missed solutions to try to find equity. And that is in, so we came up with composites 2 and 3. Let's see. In composites 2 and 3, instead of just weighting some of the other metrics or injecting the other metrics 50-50, we looked at more creative, maybe more equitable ways of dividing costs. So in the case of composite 2, that is one in which we took shared costs from the PMLS cost estimates. So we're talking about things that are not geographically specific to a district, such as, so project costs that are based on unit costs and are based on numbers on the ground. There's a lot of costs that apply sort of wholesale to, in terms of planning, project and design management. And so those costs are sort of shared and they're fairly equitable. It's kind of harder to break those out specifically by district. And so that composes 43% of the current cost estimate. And then all those unit-based costs, geographic-based costs, if you will, are 57% of the share. So then that gives us kind of another way to divide or weight these numbers. And then we can plug different metrics in. So what we did was we took the shared costs and we tried applying an equal distribution between the 4 districts for that 43% of the overall cost. And then for the second half, we used actual project costs by district. And I'm going to show you some graphs that show you the outcomes, the outputs here. In composite 3, we did the same thing. We divided 43% of the costs equally among the 4 districts. And then we took 57% of the costs and we divided that based on benefits received. And so I'm going to show you, just talk a little bit about the advantages and disadvantages, and then you're going to get to, I'll show you the numbers, show you where's the beef. So the economic benefits metric is still one of our leading methods. And it, as I said before, it's based on the most comprehensive economic analysis that we have to date. It's based every single building in the floodplain was inventoried. Additional contents were inventoried for specific high asset buildings. We looked at economic disruptions to the rail, to the airline industry. We even looked at like what does it cost to restore open green spaces, including parks, some of our recreational facilities like golf courses, and then all those things. And we looked at restoration costs for that. So all this, a lot of information went in, a lot of study went in. And then that was further made more sophisticated by taking the geotechnical failure modeling and then the scenario modeling and flood inundation modeling to come up with those damages. So extremely comprehensive. But the problem with solely going based on that number is, it doesn't, the economic benefits are say highest in say MCDD because that district is larger and it has a lot more assets. And so the ratio goes very high towards MCDD. Whereas a lot of the project work is in Pen 1, Pen 2, and SDIC. So you'll see that number here very shortly, I promise. Composite A is that one where we did 50-50 between the economic benefits and the project costs. So naturally, it sort of balances that out. We spoke to that one last meeting. And then the other two are different ways of trying to find a balance. So I should have like a drum roll built into the PowerPoint at this point, but I'm just going to flip it over. So this is the result. And instead of, I can show you a table of percentages. Last time I tried to, I think, dizzy you or put you to sleep with just a blank table of percentages and let you do your brain exercises for the day instead of Sudoku. This is hopefully this speaks to folks a little bit better. So by measure, and I apologize, Microsoft Excel has a mind of its own. It did not let me reorder. Every time I tried to change the table, it sort of decided that this is the order of the allocation methods. So you have to bear with me and reordered them. But so here you can see the bottom one is the project cost by district. You can see that there is a lot of work in Pen 1 and Pen 2. And as we spoke last time, and there's a very small amount of work in MCDD. But when we look at the next line above it, you can see the economic benefits received is extremely high. It's the highest of all. So it's completely shifted. It's completely upside down. I think most of you recognize the reason for that is not just because the higher value and the larger size of the district, but also because of some of the failure scenarios that involve like cascading failure through some of the other districts. So that I think it normally would be higher, but it is amplified by the potential failure scenarios from the other districts. And so if we used either one of these metrics, it wouldn't really serve in an equitable way because it doesn't recognize how much work is done in those two districts, but then where the actual benefits are received. So when we look at our first composite using both of those 50-50, here are the results. So you can see something that's much more, it's mitigating those extremes, yet I think still applying a lot of fairness. So then we arrive at, and I'm just going to speak to the very top line because it's sort of in that sort of list of contributing metrics. PED costs by district. That's sort of the core, gave us a breakdown of that. It's not much different than the overall project cost by district, partially because most of the top line numbers are arrived at as a multiplier of the overall project cost. So they're bound to be very similar. There's a few line items that pull them apart from each other, but okay. So now we arrive at the final thing, the three composites, and I'm going to give you a question. If you have any clarifying questions before I start these, I'm happy to take those, but I'm going to save the bulk of the questions till after this slide.
Jeff, you had a question?
No. Okay. It's riveting, folks. I know. But hopefully my goal is to help make this make sense. So if there's anything that you're not quite getting, this is a lot thrown at you. So the first composite.
My light turned off from lack of movement. That's what happened. So once in a while, you'll see me go like that. It turns my lights back on.
Oh.
Just being green here.
Great, thanks. Okay, so the last two, composite 2 and 3, and I want to say that, you know, we can plug and play some of the other metrics, or, you know, in this case, some of the shared costs, or when we say project costs, we can just as easily divide it by the PED costs by district. So if there's a different arrangement, or if there's a new metric you want us to plug into one of these composites, you know, something that we didn't think of, we certainly are open to that. We think at some point you're going to be going really deeply down a rabbit hole, and we're sort of losing the forest from the trees, but certainly want to make sure that all options are considered. Nancy.
Thank you. Can you just clarify an overarching thing? This cost allocation is necessary in case we have to pay for PED before the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District is formed? Or
Yeah,
is
that's a great question. And that also speaks to, I have the numbers in the very back in case anybody wanted to see the absolute numbers instead of percentages, but we are anticipating this allocation method being necessary to determine PED costs, which are currently estimated at 5.6 million across the board over the lifespan of PED. And we anticipate PED occurring prior to formation of the new district. It is not an absolute, but we anticipate that, and in which case we need to figure out how to allocate it. The other thing I would say in the best case scenario, so if the new district forms, you know, let's say PED starts later than we expect, it doesn't start in, 18 months from now, that pushes PED further right. And if we get authorized sooner, then there may be overlap between when we expect design phase and construction phase to occur. Once construction phase occurs, then any remaining PED costs get rolled into the construction phase, and it'll be paid for by the new district. So this sort of, the numbers that we provide show 5.6 allocated, you know, through these methods, but the Corps' current best case plan shows a 2-year overlap. And so really only half of the 5.6 would be funded. But, you know, again, I stress there's a lot of uncertainty in the exact sequencing of when both PED starts, what PED could be started, when the PPA would be signed for the construction phase to start, and when the new district rolls over. So, 5.6 is the worst case scenario for PED. We might be allocating all this for a smaller amount, but we need to be prepared for the 5.6 in the event that we don't get authorized in the work plan and funded for construction as anticipated.
Mark, just a heads up, we have 10 minutes left before the auditor's report.
Great, thanks, Jamie.
Mary Helen?
Maybe I'll talk to you later because this will probably be long, and I might have missed it, but I don't understand, or I wouldn't be able to explain to anybody. And if you did, I didn't understand. The PED cost by districts, Penn 1 is 40%, but the economic benefit is only 0.09%. And so if we're paying more, and what that interprets to me, the non-analyst person, is we're paying more and getting less than anybody else. I mean, it's not in balance. The others are pretty close in balance. Penn 1 pays that 40 overall project cost is 40%, so maybe it's tied to that, but if you want to have a conversation later and explain it and use your time for your presentation, I'm fine with that.
I can, in a real quick nutshell, Mary Ellen, thanks for your question. It's yeah, that is due to the extensive nature of the projects in Penn 1, and as we said, there is a lot of residual benefits. Many of the model scenarios do have that carryover from Penn 1, Penn 2 to MCDD, and so that's why they share a great amount of cost. But as we all know, there's because of the large amount of open space in Penn 1, the economic benefits aren't as high in Penn 1 proportionally.
A question from Brian, then Corky, then Val.
Yeah, hey, Mark.
Okay. I'm just going to take a pause really quick, and I'll let you answer your question, Brian. But I just want to make sure I'm going to just assume that composites 2 and 3 are sort of explained at this point from my earlier discussion. So I'm not going to walk through that anymore and just take your questions. If I get a consensus from everyone, I'll look for some head shakes that you guys kind of get it. Okay, let's see some thumbs up, some smiles. Thanks. Okay, Brian, please.
Yeah, so I see the overall project cost by district, and then it goes into the sort of massaging of the numbers with the economic benefits analysis. So has this been reviewed for the authority of the different districts to basically subsidize and spend outside of their districts? Because if you look at the overall project cost by district, it's obvious there's quite a bit to do in the other 2 districts. I mean, I've gone through it for SDIC's ability to spend outside of its districts. I'm just curious if that has been taken into account and the authority to do that.
Well, I think that's part of this discussion, part of the things that we need to talk about. The core review looks at our system as a whole and the interdependencies of the system as a whole. While I think really the main reason they look at the individual districts is because they're different basins hydrologically, and so they haven't exhausted a lot of time thinking about that. That is an issue for us to consider. That's something that we need to talk about in moving forward. But there, again, as I said, it's not a face value. It's not a face value item in terms of there are interdependencies, different flood scenarios. One thing I need to check is how many of the 3,000 scenarios are in that full modeled arrangement that that involve the interdependencies of, say, MCDD and SDIC. There is way fewer because we don't have a significant fragility identified between those 2 districts like we do between Penn 2 and MCDD, for instance. But there are probably scenarios where there are interdependencies due to the flood closures that are required between those 2 at Marine Drive, for instance. And so I'll leave it at that, but it has to do with interdependency. So I don't think at face value it is certainly a valid point, but there are interdependencies that don't make it as cut and dried an issue as I think one might think. Over.
Thanks, Brian. So Mark, I heard just our authority as board members. Where does it start and where does it stop? Corky?
I've got 2 questions. And first of all, Mark, great job on this. Obviously, you put at least an hour or 2 worth of work into it. It's looking good.
I wish it were that.
Yeah. One question I've got is I really like having the PED cost by district on your chart here. It helps us kind of get some reference point. Along the same lines, I would ask that we add in the cost by acreage as well, because one is the district for obvious reason. The acreage also just kind of gives us a point of reference for the impact on taxpayers. So I'd love to see that added to that chart there. The other question for you is when we talk about the economic benefits, and obviously we're going to end up with some sort of composite, so that's great. But again, the economic benefits is part of that, of each of those composites. When we talk about the economic benefits in that calculation, was it also calculated in the costs of previous work in each district? Because that's, there's a cost of lost potential there. So if one district invested considerably more per acre or whatever, however you want to measure it, if one district invested considerably more in the previous 30 years, I'm not sure that that's included in your economic benefits analysis, and it probably should be. Do you know if that was included?
The project costs or previous project costs or previous investments in the system, they're not factored into these existing metrics.
Somehow we should factor that in, I think, is my feeling.
Okay. We'll have to brainstorm on how we can do that, how we can assess it. That would obviously involve, yeah, I will.
Because you see where I'm going. The concern here is if one district did a better job of maintaining their system, they should be rewarded. And in this, at least in the economic benefits, they're actually punished for having done that. And those who put off that those investments would be rewarded. And we need to make clear on that.
Okay. Thank you. We'll look at that issue and see how.
Feel free to follow up with me later if you want on that.
Do we have other questions?
This is Val Humble. More of a comment. I do believe that the economic benefits must be part of the calculation. And I'd like to make a comment. Pen 2 does, of course, have some large expenses showing up in this, but I don't see my constituents seeing that that work being done as a benefit to them. In fact, the biggest pushback we've had on this whole project has been the disruption that is going to be caused by the raising of the levy. So the problem of perception in my constituents is that they're not, even though they're going to require some large expenses, they're not going to see those expenses as benefiting them. They're going to see them as harming them. Anyway, economic benefits, I think, must be part of the calculation. I like combined number 3, but that's probably obvious. Thank you.
Thanks, Val. And I just, if I could respond briefly to that, is I think the talking point would be raising the levy in that area, as well as Pen 1. Obviously, the alternative, the preferred alternative that has now become the recommended plan, is called uniform level of protection. And I think it's important to note that the Pen 1 and Pen 2 are a much lower level of protection than MCDD and SDIC. And so so raising the levy by that amount substantially increases their level of protection moving forward. And frankly, investing in it now before there's any more infill and growth and development on the levy, making costs higher to raise the levy in the future is something to consider. So those two districts are much more likely to flood in the future. And as we have changes in river flow over time, that's going to be an even bigger driver. So it may not look like it, but they are receiving a pretty substantial a benefit and overall protection. But we can talk about that more if we need to. Over.
Mark, Jamie, I've added 5 minutes to this discussion. It just seems like we're not ready to stop yet. So.
And I'm gonna. I think Nancy has a question. I'm just going to say I have a discussion slide that we're started moving into. I'm going to toggle to that slide as we answer further questions. Please don't hesitate to let me know if it's instructed to show you this other slide. It is in your board, should be in your board packet in a slightly different format, but it's the same numbers. But I'm going to toggle to the next slide just so that after we answer Nancy's question, Jamie can help us wrap it up. Nancy, do you still have a question?
Yeah, my question was, what did you actually need from us today? So this is perfect. And So, well, I have the floor. I'll just say I really appreciate the graphics you showed in the presentation, because when I read through the tables, it wasn't as easy to understand as the way you explained it today. So I appreciate the presentation. Thanks.
Well, thanks, Nancy. I'll give credit to Evan and Jamie. This is a group effort. We all have different ways of wrapping our heads around this material, so it's important that took a little team effort to make sure that we cross-checked ourselves and tried to detangle this as best as possible. Jamie?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And so for the discussion, I mean, like Mark said, we have already been diving into some of these questions. So far, what I've heard is that economics needs to continue to be considered as a part of any composite moving forward. And I think, you know, to piggyback on Nancy's question, what we're looking for you today is, you know, are we ready, you know, for the two things? I mean, what questions and feedback you have. Are there any additional methods or variations that we may have missed? But are you ready to remove some of these methods from further consideration? Because right now we've been adding to them and moving kind of all of them forward and showing you the range of advantages, disadvantages around them. And through the development of the composites, I think the team is ready to take some things off the table. But we wanted to check in with all of you and see if you were ready for that.
I'll jump in and say that I'm hesitant to take very much off the table. You know, maybe the levy mile, you know, but in general, going to the composites it's a black box, and that makes a lot of people nervous. So it would be really nice. I'm not sure how much work is involved to kind of keep all of the or not all of them, but keep most of the methods on there so that we can kind of weigh them back and forth and refer to the different methodologies.
Thanks, Corky.
I'm going to agree with Corky, because I'm going to, from a standpoint that we've been in the weeds on this for so long, and how we would have to explain to our neighbors and constituents. Like Val said, you know, some people aren't happy with it, some people are, and that's true of any issue faced anybody. But I think we need to leave those methods on there so that we have more measurements, like Corky said, to keep them in front of us until, till it's evident that we can explain it in street language to people that haven't been following this for 5 years. It's going to be a difficult topic, and I praise Evan and her team that they'll be able to make it simple, or at least less complicated. But I think taking things off the table now leaves us in a position to explain why we might have done that, or why this issue's not there. So all I ever hear and say, repeat, is the people that I speak with just want to stay safe and dry. And if we can make these methods show that, then I think that will be important. And we have statistical data to back that up of, as Mark explained, the benefits far surpass the costs for Pen 1 and Pen 2, because the railroad embankment is the biggest cost. And we don't know what that is even yet. So I think we need to address it from a standpoint of somebody that doesn't know a whole lot and what information that they need. And taking issues away now, I don't feel informed enough to be able to do that.
Thanks, Mary Helen. Tom, I'm mindful of the time. We're at 12:36, and so
I think this discussion is too rich right now to stop. Emily, can we get a couple more minutes?
Yeah, definitely.
Nancy, I see your hands up, and then James.
Thanks. I understand and I agree with what's been said by Corky and Mary Helen, but I would propose we could take composite 1 off the table, because I think the 50-50 cost share is fairly arbitrary, and composite 3 is the one that splits it 47.53, which is on a, it's not an arbitrary number, it's a number that's measured. So I think there's very little difference between them except that 50/50 is arbitrary. So if people agree, we can take it off. If you don't want to take it off, that's also fine.
Well, I appreciate seeing the value in the distribution between 2 and 3 for folks weigh in. I would just say that, yeah, there's giving equal weight to 2 different, I guess it just, how important are each of those factors? And if we say that costs incurred versus benefits received reserve equal weight, then I'm not sure that it's completely arbitrary, but certainly certainly we can try that that other method with those other percentages and drop it. But I would argue if we leave some of these other things in the discussion, then I think that one bears is a good reference. If you don't like it as moving a leading metric, then it's still a very good reference metric. Over.
James.
Great. Thanks, Jamie. Thanks, Mark. Great presentation. Just a few quick comments. One is I also would like more time to take a deeper dive into the alternatives and just maybe encourage you folks, if you haven't already done so, to set up a comment tracking. So what each of the boards or individual board members think about various alternatives, that might be helpful. Because this is like we said, or like Tom said, it's a rich discussion, and how do you track those comments? A question I have, and you don't need to answer it now, is the ultimate authority. Each board's going to have to make a decision on, or to I guess, agree to ultimately agree to a methodology. How is that decision made? Is a question I have at this point. And then lastly, when we get through this, and if we agree to something as far as the allocation of PED costs, what are the implications, excuse me, what are the implications for project implementation? In other words, if the new district is not stood up and we adopt an allocation for PED, have we set a precedent or committed ourselves to an allocation of costs for the full construction? And that, again, probably can't be answered now, but just it's something I'm mindful of. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that, so Mark and Evan and Colin and I, we've all been taking notes. I appreciate your comment about tracking carefully the conversation that we've had here around these different methodologies. So what I've heard, if we can kind of wrap it up, because Tom, I'm not seeing any other hands.
Danny?
Yeah, just a couple of comments. You know, I agree. Some of these things I think we need to take a deeper dive into, especially I need to have a little better understanding of the economic benefit piece as far as how that works. And then also we talked about how we were going to value businesses. And I could just see some of them in Sandy where their inventory is varying by millions of dollars a day. How exactly is that going to work?
Well, if you are interested in seeing, there is a federally sanctioned method that was used as the HEC. Every Army Corps model starts with the HEC acronym. It's a HEC FDA, flood damage analysis, and at base value, the buildings are valued based on a depth damage curve that which is based on the depths of all the flooding scenarios, and they're statistically valued. So floods that happen more frequently, those depths are used proportionally, and then it's all applied to those buildings. And again, there's FEMA depth damage curves that, based on empirical data, that show how different building types are damaged. And then typically the model says 100% of the building value is used for the building content value. In some cases, we dove a little further, us recognizing that, say, for instance, aviation assets and other things were more expensive. And we did reach out on other facilities public utility facilities, and we looked for other means of better analyzing that value. One thing I could say is, in terms of the level of effort to reshuffle any economic benefits analysis, it would be pretty significant, and it would require significant cost to have the Corps rerun the scenarios. If we get to PED and the boards and the new board has not been set up and taken the responsibility for the construction implementation cost share, that by that time there'll be an opportunity to ask the Corps for an economic benefits analysis update, at which point, if you have concerns about certain things that weren't factored in, those things could be integrated. We'll be dealing with much larger cost share values at that point. So I'm not trying to shrug it off at this point. I think a pretty comprehensive value was benefits analysis was conducted. But if you have questions on that, it is one of the appendices of the plan, and it was made available to you. And if I'm happy to go over that, we can provide it to you again if you want to go through it. It's pretty comprehensive. There's a summary in the final report itself, and then the more exhaustive full explanation of the economic benefits analysis is in the appendix. So I offer that over.
Jamie, Mark, thank you for the presentation. Any quick closing comments?
I would just like to say, I think what I'm going to do is work with the team and try and create some individualized opportunities for board members who want to go a little deeper, and we can find some ways to share some staff capacity to help you in an individual way get comfortable with this, because it's really fundamental. And I really appreciate the level of discussion here. We're out of time. So let's try and do a little bit more tailored engagement with you all to make sure you feel comfortable with where we're at. And then we can help the staff figure out how we can move forward with narrowing the options for your consideration.
And I'm sorry, I just want thanks very much, Jim. I'm happy to make myself available. I saw Mary Ellen had a question that I just don't think it merits answering before it move on, and because I don't want to be callous and make it seem like economic benefits are the only important metric. Human life is not considered in economic benefits. We don't sort of put a price tag on the human life, but there's an entire flood analysis through, you guessed it, HEC life sim, and there are numbers that's in the life loss appendix of the plan, and it would be difficult to compare apples to oranges and use a life number metric against economic benefits, but that is something we've sort of been spitballing. So if we have an idea, again, we can point people to the appendix so you can have that information at your disposal. But life loss and life safety modeling was incorporated into the Corps' analysis.
Okay, thanks. I mean, it just seems to be overlooked. And when you talk about the cost of a building or an airplane compared to somebody's life, philosophically, I have a hard time with that.
Yeah, life loss was factored in. It was considered another social effect. The Corps used to only consider economic benefits, but they've become a little less callous with time and can realize that life safety, now that they've found ways to model it, evacuation routes, and they incorporate in the flood routing modeling, and there are some numbers. Over.
So it sounds like we've got our wrap up. We're going to work with Jim to take into account your feedback, and we want to keep the momentum of this conversation going. And so if you recall, the 18-month time frame, will be coming back to you possibly at your next format meeting with the answers to these questions and a little deeper dive. And so thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Jamie. So moving on to our next item, the auditor's presentation. Janet, I show you're going to do our introduction of the presentation.
Oh, okay, sure. I wasn't aware of that. Hi, is James Marta? Is he
Yes,
on?
I am here.
Okay. Normally, David Becker has done the presentations to the boards. He has retired, and James Marta is going to be doing the presentation this year. He is, I believe, the principal of James Marta and Company. So anyway, welcome, Jim.
Coincidentally, yes.
So anyway, yeah, he's going to be presenting the audits and reviews of the 2019-20 years for all the districts. So I'll let him inform you and educate you.
Yes, and I was the partner on the engagement this year. And then the first year of the engagement, when we first started, David and I did it together. And so I was familiar. You've got a lot of interrelated programs. I was listening to your prior presentation. So what I want to do is, one, report to you, be available to answer questions, and talk to you overall what we did. So the engagement summary, for each entity, I'm going to describe what we did. So Multnomah County Drainage District, that was an audit, and determination of the work we do has to, whether we do an audit review is dependent on the size of the organization and state requirements, whether you're required to have an audit or review or any other type of look at the financial information. So we did an audit of the Multnomah County Drainage District, and the opinion is unmodified. So a lot of times people look at the whole report and go, this is the auditor's report. But actually, technically, only the letter is the auditor's report, and the rest is a representation of management. And certainly your staff has worked on these reports and approved them, and so that's their representation, and then our opinion is the letter on front of it. Although we do prepare and issue those reports on your behalf. Peninsula Drainage District was a review. There's no modification. So how a review differs for an audit looks at the numbers, looks at the control structures, and looks at and determines whether the financial statements fairly present. A review is less in scope of audit. We don't look at the control structures, but we look at the numbers. We ensure that there's plausible reasons why there would be variances and underline it, and we make sure that there's no adjustments that would be material that need to be made. And so it's less scope than an audit overall. Peninsula Drainage District number 2 was an audit, unmodified opinion. So unmodified is the best the auditor gives you. It's not qualified. Sandy Drainage District, it's a nonprofit entity, but it had a review, and there's no modifications. And then the Columbia Corridor Drainage Districts, that's a review and no modifications. So the key report components is so with the audit report, there's an opinion or a letter on what we did. So an audit opinion or a review opinion. And then after that, for the government entities, we have a management and discussion analysis. And it's a great place for you to figure out what happened during the year. The audit is really regimented and prescribed notes and such, but there's a place for really management to talk about what happened and why numbers might have changed over the prior year. So it's a good resource for you users to look at it. Then we do have a report on internal controls, and that's for the audits only. And so that's on page 44 to 45 on Multnomah, and on Pen 2, page 24 to 25. So if there was any significant or material weaknesses, we would report them there, and there were none. Review of fiscal affairs, and so the state of Oregon has compliance requirements that they want looked at for governmental entities, and they have prescribed areas that the auditor examines, and we have to report on those. And so we have those reported on pages 44 to 47 on the Multnomah, and on Pen 2 on page 26 to 27. And so the other entities, we don't do that, but we have management's representations on those. So the top 2 are audits. And so the conclusion on that is we did not have any items of compliance. So that's good news. And then we have budget to actual comparisons, and those are in each of the reports. And that's good for your board oversight. Now, a budget is a plan. It's also approval of what you do, but there might be changes, and that's okay during the year. And it's an opportunity for management to display that and describe what happened during the year, because sometimes you have to respond to changes that are happening. So other significant items is that, you have the Columbia Corridor Drainage District, and it basically conducts the projects and then does those transfers over to the other entities. And so it doesn't really hold those, it administers them. And so we do show that the assets that it holds and that they have construction in progress as follows for each of these entities. And then we do have a liability sitting in there for IFA loan of $10,953. Multnomah corridor that has an operating loss. Now, one thing I want to point out is if you had a business and it showed an operating loss, you'd go, oh no, what's happening? We've got a loss this year. But the timing of a business, they have a cycle, and the cycle of a business could be, a year typically. But for you as these districts, you have construction projects, you have maintenance projects, and you might have a big variances is when you bring money in and when you spend it. And so you might be bringing in resources and gathering resources so you can put on a big project and conduct that. And so the fact that you have a loss is not necessarily a performance weakness in it. It just happens to be that you spent more resources in that year, and that's typically attached to when you're conducting projects. So when you look at this and if you see losses or decreases in net position, I have some other big numbers to show you that don't be concerned about that. You do in this entity, this is where the employees set, and so you do have a other post-employment benefits liability. So when employees retire, they might be eligible to certain retiree benefits that are health benefits, for instance, and this is not the pension. And so the calculation of that liability is $3.6 million. That's what sits on the books, but there have been payments against that haven't been netted out, and that's an accounting construct that will be netted against it once the actuary.
I did.
And so the net position for this agency is $8.1 million, but the unrestricted portion is $194,000, meaning that most of these dollars are earmarked for specific projects, and you can't just spend it on anything. They're specifically identified. On Pen 2, you had operating income of $194,000, increase in net position of $292, and then you had a net position of about $6 million, so you have a strengthening in that program. In Pen 1, small operating income, increase in net position. So the reason why there might be operating income and then your net position went up higher is because there could be other non-operating contributions or investment income that could strengthen it. And then your net position is $1.5 million in that program. And Sandy, you have operating income of $513,000, increase in net assets of $559,000, and so you have total net assets of $2.9 million. Now, if we show net assets of $2.9 million in any of these, net assets does not mean here's how much you'll have to spend, because if you have a levee improvement project and it costs $2.9 million, that's an asset. You can't spend it. So what you really need to do is look at, the assets, and what makes up those assets and what is spendable in your budget. And then the joint contracting agency, $567,000 of net income, increase in net position of $186,000, and that's because it had transfers out. And so the net position is $232,000. So I heard on the last time you liked the pictures, in your last presentation, and when you look at big numbers and you're looking at activity over time, it's really good to see it side by side over time. So what we did is we have accumulated it and went back in some of the records and to show, okay, here's the Multnomah district, and we can see how the assets have grown. And so this is where you would have building projects and such that would going on, and that would be on the books. You do have some liabilities associated with this, and if you take the assets minus the liabilities, it equals the net position. But as I said, this whole net position is not necessarily spendable because a lot of it is all sitting there in assets. That's like saying if if your house was worth $1 million, that you have $1 million to spend. No, because you have to live in your house and you can't spend that. So you have to know what those assets are. So if you look at the capital assets, so you do see some growing in the capital assets. You do have work in process that hasn't been finalized yet. And this is the accumulated depreciation. So this is how much we are kind of expensing over time. And this is what's accumulated expensed over time on these assets. This is Pen 2. So you see that Pen 2 is in relatively a better position because it has a lot of assets, but its liabilities are very minimal. And the prior entity, since they have people, they have the OPEB debt, that really contributes to the liabilities that are reported here. So we do see a strong net position and not much in liability. So a lot cleaner and leaner program. Pen 2 capital assets, you can see that we have some contributions. You have this straight line sitting through the middle, and that represents land. So we don't depreciate land. It's not shown at market value. It's shown at cost and or estimated cost. And so that's why it's just sitting here. And then this is the accumulated depreciation on these projects. And as you bring on more projects, the depreciation rate will go a little bit quicker. Depreciation is designed to recognize that a project has a lifespan, and so we don't expense it all the first year. We kind of divide it. So if it has a 20-year lifespan, it gets divided over that time, and so you can kind of match up and also understand that you're going to have to replace that in 20 years. On Pen 1, you can see the assets, and so you can see how it grew here, and that was as you brought on projects. You had some big projects between 2013 and 15 that were brought on, less so in more recent years. And then you do have some liabilities associated with that, but those look like they're starting to get paid down. Capital assets for Pen 2 is, so you do have a lot of work in progress. So hopefully this matches up with what you understand your work in progress. As those get completed, those do need to get wrapped up into the capital assets. And you do have some accumulated depreciation across here. Sandy development, and you can see quite a spike in their assets over here, and that's as you brought on projects. So you had some big projects. You went from 800,000 to almost about 3.6 million dollars of values. And but you do have some debt associated with it. But the great thing is these graphs are showing that you're not heavily debt burdened. And so you have been paying for your stuff. You do have some debt, but you're not heavily debt burdened compared to the assets that you've brought online. We do audits of a lot of governments. We've got some school districts that have built big school sites, and they have bonds that they don't pay on for 20 years. So the debt keeps increasing, and so they're very debt leveraged. And so your organizations look very lean. Okay, and so here's the capital assets. So as I said, is that you had brought on more capital assets, but the orange here is showing the work in process component, but as those get converted, they become assets that are put into service. So that's kind of a display of it. We did give you the full financials. I know you guys, in reading all your board minutes and talking to your staff, you guys are always really looking at the numbers. And so I didn't go through each of the financial statements and just trying to give the big picture overview. And management would be able to tell you more of the specific projects. Our job was to give you some assurance on these numbers. And so the audit does that. We have an unqualified opinion, unmodified for the audits, and we have no indications of adjustments for the reviews. And so the auditor is saying things look good, okay? If there's not any questions on those parts, I want to talk about other required communications that we do in conjunction with the audit. So we're required to report to the boards and those charged with governance about during the audit, we did not have any significant issues to report. So even if the audit went well. I mean, it took longer from delays for staff to close it. So that was an impact on the timing of the work we did. But I'm telling you, your staff really brought it together, and I'm sure worked some long hours because we were able to, at the end, bring it all together by the due dates. The biggest estimates associated with these financial statements are the estimated pension or post-employment benefit pension, and that is estimated by an outside actuary. So you should always understand what numbers on here did somebody have to figure out, and that was the biggest estimate. We did have some journal entries that were provided in the course and while we're completing it by management, and so we did review those and audit through those journal entries. We don't have any new pronouncements that we think have impact for you at this point in time, but we'll discuss that in the future. GASB has a number of things that are in the works. Our overall comments is there was, as I said, no opinion modifications, no deficiencies identified. So the audit is not just looking at the numbers. We look at the control structures. We do full tests, and our test is not just to see if the transaction's right, but see if the controls that your management team has described to us are in place and are suitable for the audit. So we don't do an internal control audit, but we look at controls to see what we can rely for the numbers we are working on. Overall growth, there's been overall growth in your organization and your entities. As I said, when I step back and look at it as more of a finance person, that you have good debt to asset ratios, and so that's great. You're not just really leveraged to do these things. And I think that means that you're charging rates and you've been responsive as all member users of this program to put in the funds to fund the projects as you go instead of being debt focused. And that's a strong model. But I really think you have a good management team. They're very knowledgeable about it. They're very responsive in the audit, but as I said, the audit was conducted later than we usually would plan on. So with that, that is the presentation on the work that we did. Are there any questions?
Questions for James?
Mr. Chair, may I just say something briefly?
Go ahead, Jim.
I just want to take a second to thank Janet and her team. This is a complicated set of books, and they're a small but mighty team. And I'm new, but I'm really impressed with the approach and professionalism that Janet and the team bring to the work. And I just want to say thank you, because I know it's a big deal to get an audit this clean. And Janet, thanks for your hard work. And to the rest of the team, we are going to continue to do what Janet tells us to do, because it's very effective. Thanks, Janet.
And I want to echo that same comment, is that, you know, when we get to the end, you do have, the complexity is the number of entities and the interrelationship. And when we had questions or needs or adjustments that we were looking at, Janet was very, very responsive, and she was there for us. And I know she has other work to do than just deal with the auditors, and she was able to do it. And when we had to bring it home, you know, we all over here will work whatever hours, but she did too. Man, she worked hours and got it done. And so we're really thankful of that, because we all have to be a team to do this. And so we definitely saw that.
Thank you.
I'll just add my thanks, because I keep saying I'm the least accounting savvy person, and you made it very easy to understand, and you always look like make everything look so easy. So I really appreciate that.
I agree.
James, does your organization, and I'm not sure, this is probably directed at Nick and Janet, as the organization starts to look to becoming a new government, they'll be required to complete a CAFR, and, you know, hopefully we'll be taking steps to prepare for that major transition when these districts are dissolved and a new government has stood up.
Cool.
Working in Multnomah County, you know, I understand the significance of publishing a CAFR every year, and the more time we take to prepare for that step, I think that's time well spent. So
I'm
hopefully
unsure
we're positioning ourselves.
I'm unsure that I don't think that you're required to have a CAFR. I think that that generally speaking, entities that have CAFRs, they do it if they have a broad-based public that wants to know lots of information. So it makes sense for a county to have a CAFR or a large district. But since you have such a more specific use group that are on the board and participating, that a CAFR wouldn't necessarily be required. And it's an extra exercise to do that, like, analysis that might be for public that's not involved. And if I were to take the time that it would take to do a CAFR and look at your organization, I'd say it's better that your organization focus on your projects and your analysis that you're doing for that. I mean, your main focus for your project is, like you said, the cost allocation and looking over the next 10, 20, 50 years on these things and energy spent on that. So although I'm an accountant and we love CAFRs and all that, I have to look at the value. And I think that the value of your staff and the analysis is spent focused on your organization and meeting those instead of a prescribed format CAFR that's for a general public.
I would add to that, sir, that Tom, we would definitely talk, and Jim, correct me, we can ask the new boards later, if the urban district board, if they want a CAFR. But like James explained, we're not required to do one. I've helped prepare one a couple times. It's several weeks of extra work, and it's a lot of data that's useful to the public, but not necessarily.
Right. If you took the same efforts, or are you able to use your efforts and do that future analysis and say, here's the impacts and these other studies, and you're spending money on that, that's focused on the work that needs to be done. And I think the most value to your organization.
Yeah, I fully agree. It's up to the urban board to make that decision. But as that board considers general obligation bonds, which are a bigger public involvement, there's opportunities there to evaluate. No other questions for James? Mr. Marta, thank you so much for meeting with us here today.
You're very welcome. Best to all of you, and hope to get up to see you guys soon.
Thank you.
So I'm at our last topic, new business. Jim, you're up.
I realize I'm probably the only thing standing between you and lunch, so I will try and make it brief. Thank you all for your engagement today. I wanted to start by pointing out, if you haven't looked at the news today, you might look at some news coming out of Germany. There was some significant flooding and loss of life there, and I think it's just a good reminder of why all this work that you all are doing is so important. And so take a look. It's really scary, and it's why we really need to figure out how we're going to modernize our system to keep people safe. I'm starting to shift my engagement efforts and intake efforts to external stakeholders and getting to know people who are influential to our system and our future success. If any of you have suggestions for folks that I should be talking to, I would welcome them. And I'm working with a couple of you where I think you guys need to be part of those introductions. So I appreciate your help in helping me get to know folks. But again, would welcome any input you have on folks I should be getting to know outside of our MCDD and districts family. I want to let you know that we've updated our employee COVID policies as a result of the governor's order and the vaccination rates. And so we are now allowing staff to voluntarily return to the office. We have eliminated the mask mandate for staff so we can share vehicles, which makes our ops team very happy and more efficient, allows us to spend more time collaborating when we're traveling among work sites and so on. And we're starting to look at conversations around schedules for people and who needs to be in the office, and starting to plan for reopening the office to the general public over the next couple of months. So if you have a need to come see us at the district, we're happy to accommodate that, let me know, and we can make some space available for you with appropriate planning. I wanted to give you an update on some of the homelessness work that we're engaged in. We had, I think, a very important meeting with a range of City of Portland bureaus, including the Bureau of Transportation, the Parks Bureau, Bureau of Environmental Services, the Office of Management and Finance and their Homeless Impact Reduction Program, and I think I said the Water Bureau. And so we had a screen meeting, and we're now going to schedule a site visit to Pump Station 4, where we can start to pull together a plan to create access and hopefully secure access for the long term. That's going to be a long project, but we're getting a lot of cooperation from those bureaus to ensure we can operate our facilities before the rainy season. We're also working with Cascadia Behavioral Health and our other contractor, Rapid Response BioClean, to take some action at the Schmear Road pump station. So we're working with legal to design some notice provisions so we can let people know that we really do need to get access to some of those release valves and relief valves and to do some mowing. So we really do need people to move out of there. So we'll be working with legal and our partners to post and get that site cleaned up and provide safe access to our team. We are looking more broadly at our authorities and our easements and what the statute allows us to do in terms of people being where we have easements or where we own property, and we'll keep you updated on that. And then finally, we've just begun some conversations about safety and security for our staff when they're out in some of these locations. I don't have a solution for you, but we are investigating opportunities to ensure that our operations team is safe and secure when they're at some of these sites. I want to move on to the urban board. We have a meeting on Monday, and I know some of you, this will be duplicate information. I regret that. I think the most important thing I want to let you know is that we were not successful in obtaining a $2 million funding package from the legislature this time. We don't have precise information about what happened, but it appears that there was a key legislator who is concerned about spending what they believe are capital dollars on operations. We have a lot of support for the urban district and funding it, so we're going to be working with our lobbyists and our partners to look for other opportunities to get some investment for the urban program. And I think we'll be able to take care of that in the near term or in medium term. In the meantime, we were successful in getting a $15 million levy grant program approved. There is some dedication for rural and distressed areas, but there is a big opportunity for us to apply for additional funding through the state of Oregon's grant program. We're excited about that program and are working now with our colleagues and partners on the language for the awards and the grants. So we'll keep you posted on that. We were also successful in carrying over some money from a previous grant into the current fiscal year. So we have some remaining grant revenue to continue to fund the operation of the urban district. The other items that they'll be talking about, they'll be accepting the assets and liabilities report that you guys all worked on. They'll be having an update on their mission, vision, values conversation. We'll be talking a little bit about the legislature, going into a little more detail for them. We'll also be starting a conversation with them like we did today about the revenue analysis work that's happening and how we're going to allocate costs. And we're going to have a really fun presentation. I think you guys may have had it. I apologize for not having it all straight in my head. The History of Indigenous People by Professor David Lewis from Oregon State University. Really trying to dig into that cultural history mandate that the new board has. And we need to talk about some appointment processes. We have a couple of members of the urban board who are going to be departing for various personal reasons. So we'll be talking to the board about how they want to pursue new appointments. And then for you guys and for the new board, given the lifting of some of the restrictions, we're going to be working on providing you with some opportunities to take tours of the district, both by land and by water. So we're working with the ops team and Emily to get those put on the books, and you'll be able to pick and choose which times you want to go based on what our ops team and our staff can provide. If you have an immediate need for a tour, would you let me know? We'd love to get you out, but we are going to be providing some generalized opportunities for you to sign up. We'll be conscious of quorums and so on as we arrange those. And then the last thing I guess I want to report is that I've been working with the National Association of Storm and Floodwater Management Agencies. I'll be joining their board, which is really exciting for me. But one of the best things that has happened already in the first week since I've made acquaintances, Los Angeles, Houston, and Denver flood districts have all recently passed funding measures. And so they provided some contact information for me yesterday. So I'll be engaging those districts to learn a little bit more about how they went about their revenue process and trying to gain some lessons learned. And that's what I've got for today. We have a really great team. We're doing a lot of work internally to streamline and make our processes more transparent for everyone. People have been really great, and I'm happy to answer any questions or take on any new tasks that you need from your team. We're happy to help you out.
Questions for Jim? Jim, always very thorough. Thank you for the updates. Keep up the good work. You're staying busy, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's good fun. Really a great team, and it's really been great to get to know many of you. And for those of you who I don't know as well, I look forward to getting to know you, and certainly a lot more to come on the money issues. So we're just getting started, and I want to say thank you for digging in today. It was really great to have your engagement, and we'll be getting back to you to make sure you feel comfortable with where we're headed, even if you don't like it, because it's going to be expensive. You'll understand it by the time we're ready for decisions.
I just want to open up to the boards that are in quorum still. Any open business? Hearing none, I'm going to go ahead and ask for our boards to adjourn at this time. James, Pen 1.
Great. Thanks, Tom, for hosting. Thanks to all the staff and board members for participating today, and have a great week. Pen 1 board is adjourned.
Val, Pen 2.
2 is now adjourned. Thank you, directors, for all being here.
Val, you're breaking up.
Pen 2 is adjourned. Am I still there?
Yes, that came through. Thank you. At least on my connection, it did.
Yeah, it's just bad connection today. Sorry about that.
MCDD fell out of quorum earlier. SDIC board, we have adjourned. MCD, thank you.